Welcome to Buy, Sell, Share, a marketer's guide to the data trade, the last breakout session of Sydney Symposia this year. So if you've been attending sessions over the last couple days, and in the back of your head you've been thinking, gosh, I really wish we could just go deep on second and third-party data. Well, then we saved some of the best for last for you, because that's what this session's going to be all about. So I'm going to kick things off and talk about how Adobe thinks about second and third-party data from a product standpoint, and then I'll hand it over to Ian, who's going to facilitate a customer panel so we can learn more about how some of our leading clients are thinking about second and third-party data. So let's get started. My name's Matt Skinner. I work on the product marketing team for Adobe Audience Manager, which is Adobe's data management platform, or DMP. And I'm based in San Francisco, California, so I escaped our foggy, cold, and windy summer for a beautiful winter day in Sydney, oddly enough. So to start, let's take a big step back in time and think about shopkeepers from the turn of the last century, like 100, 120 years ago, and think about how much they knew about their customers, right? Because back then, you didn't have that many options as a consumer. So maybe there was only one or two stores in your town where you could go to purchase things like groceries, household products, other items that were necessary for survival. And think about what that meant for the shopkeeper. He or she probably knew a lot about their customers. He knew about where they lived, how many people were in their family, the types of products they would buy, what their preferences were. And then let's contrast that with how things are today. So maybe you prefer to do most of your grocery shopping at Woolworths, but when you're in a pinch and you're on a hurry home from work, you'll stop into 7-Eleven for a couple essential items. But there's still other products that you prefer to pick up at a pharmacy because maybe they have broader selection. And of course, you have some things that are just delivered to your doorstep through Amazon. And there's certain goods and services that you care a lot about, like your coffee, and so you prefer to go to a local cafe. Now, as consumers, this is all fantastic, right? It gives us a lot more options than we ever had before. But as marketers, professionally speaking, it makes it a lot more challenging to know who our consumers are, to know what's important to them, to know about their engagements across these touch points, which are now fragmented across multiple different businesses and locations. So when we talk to a bunch of our customers around the world, there's some common themes that emerge in terms of the challenges that they face organizationally. Everybody's trying to differentiate from their competitors, right? And as part of that, increasing customer value, increasing loyalty, so you could build the lifetime value of your best customers. And everybody in marketing departments needs to improve their marketing ROI year over year, month over month, maybe even week over week. But there's this underlying business issue behind all of that, which is knowing your audience. Because if you do a really good job knowing your audience across all of their touch points, it allows you to differentiate more meaningfully because you know what's important to them, which in turn trickles down into customer value and loyalty, and even helps you improve your marketing ROI. And you know your audience through your data assets. So there's first-party data, which most of us are probably familiar with. This is data that's collected by your own organization. So perhaps that includes CRM profile data, analytics data on web engagement, on app engagement, point of sale or offline data, media performance data. You may even also have sensitive or directly identifiable data like email addresses, which aren't stored in your DMP, but which are stored elsewhere, like a data lake in your organization. Then there's also second-party data, which we think of as our partners' first-party data. So maybe this is complementary data. You and a partner have some shared customers, and you have a relationship where you're sharing different data points back and forth to help complement each of your individual views of those customers. Or maybe it's about audience expansion, where they have a different set of customers, and you want to grow your reach by messaging those other customers that could also be meaningful to you. And then finally, there's third-party data. And third-party data gets aggregated from other sources, and it's typically purchased. Common third-party data examples would include demographic data, household income data, spend pattern data, interest data, which can all get layered onto your first-party data to complete that profile. So let's see how that works in practice. Let's say you're collecting first-party data because you have Adobe Analytics installed on your site, and that's telling you something about content affinity, about the type of content that your users are browsing. Maybe you have a second-party data relationship that's giving you some CRM data. Perhaps that's feeding in gender information about some users. And then third-party data you're purchasing can include household income brackets. When you're able to combine all three of these data points against a single profile, it gives you this more robust picture of who you're talking to. In this case, a female who's higher income, who's been browsing blue tops on your retail site. And with this unified profile, you're able to push this information to all of your activation channels, whether that's paid media, site personalization, email CRM, or even exporting it out of the DMP so that you could do additional modeling or analysis on that audience. So what's needed to get there? Well, first, you need to be able to combine all of your first-party data sources to create a unified profile. Next, complete that profile with second and third-party data that helps fill any gaps that you may have. Third, you need to be able to export those audiences so you can actually activate against them and deliver great experiences to your customers. And then finally, reporting, analysis, and optimization, because as digital marketers, we know that our work is never over. How many folks in here are working with Audience Manager right now? Okay, fair amount. How many folks are working with one of those other DMPs? Okay, a couple people. So for those of you who are less familiar with data management platforms, just want to cover off on a couple of basic points of the three key functions of what a DMP like Audience Manager does. So the first is about data in. This is about taking in those first-party data points from different silos within your organization, combining them and tying them to a single profile. So bringing together offline data, e-commerce data, web analytics, and so on. Once you've done that, you're ready to create audiences. So this is about tying those profiles together and grouping them into similar profile-based segments, augmenting those segments with second and third-party data to have a rich view of who your customer is. You could do lookalike modeling. And then once you've defined the segment and who you want to target, you're ready to activate that data across paid media channels through Adobe Ad Cloud or a DSP, site personalization through Adobe Target or other platforms, email CRM, and so on. And within Audience Manager, the way that we manage second and third-party data is through a feature called Audience Marketplace. And what Audience Marketplace allows you to do is group together second and third-party data and tie it to the profiles. And it really has three key benefits. The first is it serves as a clearinghouse. So it gives you a single place to account for and reconcile data costs. You know, we talk to a lot of customers, and prior to using Marketplace, they might have all these different contracts with third-party data providers, which becomes sort of unwieldy when you try to scale, and this solves for that. It puts it all in one place. It also serves as a partner network so that you can locate new data providers and source and contract with them. And then finally, it provides an e-commerce-like end-user experience that's entirely self-service if you need it to be, while also giving you the flexibility to negotiate with partners if needed. Another key aspect of Audience Marketplace is our patented data export controls. And so what this allows you to do is assign labels to individual data sources in Marketplace so you don't run afoul of privacy or agreement regulations that might be in place. So for example, for a given data source, you can define whether or not that can be tied to PII, whether or not it can be used for site ad targeting, for off-site targeting, or for on-site personalization. And so the reason why this is important is you may be in a situation where you're bringing in, say, media impression data, and you don't necessarily want to tie that back to an email address that you have sitting in another system. Data export controls can help you avoid that type of circumstance before you export out of Audience Manager. There's three sort of umbrella use cases that we see customers use Marketplace for. The first is segments and overlap, and this is available at no cost to customers who have Marketplace. This allows you to look at the scale of your first-party audiences and see how that scale changes when you layer on second or third-party data. And we'll see an example of this in just a moment. The next one is activation. So this is about taking your first-party audiences, layering on second and third-party data, and then activating them at different marketing destinations like the ad cloud, like Target, or even back into Adobe Analytics using a new feature that we have called Audience Analytics, which allows you to get a more robust view of who your key audiences are. And then finally, modeling. So another common use case is using third-party data to inform lookalike models within Audience Manager, which allows you to find more customers that share similar traits to your best customers. Just to kind of give you a glimpse at how the UI looks, within Marketplace, you can search for different data feeds based on keywords. You can see on the left here, we have some branded data providers that pop up, along with a description of the data that's available. Then you could see the volume of their 30-day uniques, as well as the overlap with the first-party data that you already have within your instance of Audience Manager. When you drill down a level, this is what that overlap report looks like. It's a simple Venn diagram. So when you're thinking about third-party data, or second-party data for that matter, and you see maybe smaller overlap between your first-party data and a partner's data, what that means is you could be looking at a use case that's about audience reach or prospecting, where they have some new users that you're not aware of yet that might be worth messaging. When you see high levels of overlap, that might facilitate a use case where you're trying to complete profiles, and maybe they have certain data points that you don't have, like for instance, the income data that we saw in the previous example from a third-party data provider. It's important to note that there's different ways you could work with data within Marketplace. So data sellers are able to not only define the use cases that their data can be used in, but they can also set pricing. They can decide if they want customers to subscribe to data feeds on a monthly, all-you-can-eat sort of model, or on a CPM basis. Once you've defined which traits you want to contract for with the data partner, you use them just like other first-party traits within Audience Manager to create robust segments. So getting started, there's really 6 best practices that we recommend based on conversations with customers that are doing this well as just general best practices within the tool. The first one is begin with the use case. So start small. Focus on 1 or 2 key use cases and then grow from there. Don't try to boil the ocean by trying to use second and third-party data to address every possible use case you could think of. The next is, and this is critical, establish metrics and KPIs. It may sound obvious, but a lot of people skip this step, and then it becomes really difficult to measure if it's worth spending money on third-party data after the fact. The third step, identify gaps in your first-party data, and this is about taking an audit of what you already have. So what types of data sources are you lacking that you think you would benefit from, and then go and identify those sources with the partners that you want to work with. Because ultimately, it's not usually about identifying the right partner, it's about identifying the right data set that's going to complement and facilitate the use cases that you need. On the other hand, consider what you can offer to partners, and this is especially relevant for second-party use cases. What unique data do you have that could be really valuable to them that they might not have insight into? And build on existing partnerships. So most organizations have co-sponsorships or other types of partnerships that may sit outside of your purview within the org, but if there's ways that you could tie in second-party terms to those partnerships, there may be some new and interesting opportunities that both parties can take advantage of. And then finally, be ready to iterate, to test, and learn. Figure out what data works best for you, what's worth pursuing and doing more of, what's maybe worth jettisoning and putting off to the side. So for third-party data sources, if you have Audience Marketplace, you can go in and check out all the different data providers. If you don't, we have a great tool called Adobe Audience Finder. It's adobe-audience-finder.com, which allows you to check out all the different data providers that we have in Marketplace and some of the different feeds that they make available. And you could filter this by market as well as by vertical. Just to talk a little bit about a case study with one of our customers, MGM Resorts. So they're using Marketplace for third-party and also second-party data. What they were dealing with was a fragmented partner ecosystem where they had contracts sitting in a bunch of different places, which was making it really difficult for them to launch campaigns in a timely manner. So what they did is they started consolidating all these contracts through Marketplace. They were selecting vendors and making sure that they could do prospecting with lookalike modeling, because that was a key use case that they decided on. And they were using Audience Manager and Ad Cloud and Conduction to do segmentation and targeting. Some of the benefits that they saw, they actually were able to decrease their data costs as a percentage of their media costs, so it made it more efficient. They were able to do more granular segmentation. They were able to have a faster campaign turnaround and also improved campaign performance, visibility, and attribution. Second-party data is a really hot topic right now, and it's really great to be here in ANZ, because some of the most interesting second-party use cases that we see are actually coming out of this region. And we're going to hear a lot more about second-party data during the panel, so I won't belabor this too much, but there's just a few key points I want to make in terms of how we think about second-party data at Adobe. The first is, if you're only talking about second-party data as monetizing your own first-party data, you might be missing the bigger opportunity. And the reason for that is data monetization represents a one-to-many use case, which is pretty easy to wrap our heads around. But there's also one-to-one use cases with second-party data, which can add a lot of value to both partners, where having to tie it back to exchanging money can actually get in the way of that partnership. And we'll see an example of that in just a moment. But some of those use cases include things like guaranteed or custom audiences. This is when an advertiser would say, I want to target this pool of users and only this pool of users, and pass them off to a publisher so they could do really granular targeting. And then premium extensions. So the publisher would maybe run that campaign and say, hey, did you know when we ran this campaign, we actually saw overlap on our end with this other group of users that you aren't thinking about? Would you like to also target them? Now, these types of use cases might be a little bit more manual in nature, but they could also unlock a lot of interesting opportunities with the right partner. Tourism Australia has an interesting second-party data use case. So what they're doing here is they're partnering with some key airlines within the market, and they're looking at prospects' behaviors as they navigate across their properties. So they're looking at the cities that they're looking at key attractions, and they're sending that data to airline partners so the airlines can target them with relevant advertising. After the users convert with the airline will share those users back to Tourism Australia so that they can suppress them in their future marketing efforts, conserving budget and improving the efficiency of their overall buys so that they can reallocate that budget elsewhere. We heard another really great second-party use case, and this might be one of my favorite ones right now. Samsung at Adobe Summit back in March, not in the spring, in the fall for everybody here, shared this second-party use case where they were trying to basically close the loop from brand awareness advertising all the way down to performance advertising. So what they did here is they created a partnership with a big box retailer that sells Samsung electronics products. Samsung would market a certain number of brand impressions to users, and once they hit that frequency cap, they would pass those users to their second-party retailer. The retailer would then retarget those users with a down-funnel message to drive conversion on their sites and in their stores. And so this ended up being a huge acquisition opportunity. Originally, when Samsung and this retailer looked at their overlap, there wasn't a ton there. So they were actually going after brand new users to each of them. And interestingly, they found that the Samsung segments actually performed better than some of the retailers' existing retargeting segments. So I really like this use case because I started off my career as a media buyer, and there's always a debate among media buyers of, oh, like what's brand doing for the results of our campaign versus performance marketing, and what's best. And I think this is a really interesting and creative way to address that challenge, to think about connecting the dots from a user standpoint between the messages they get from a brand all the way down to the down-funnel conversion messages that they get from a retailer. I wanted to also share some of the key learnings that Samsung spoke about at Summit. They've been doing third-party data for a while, so they've had to develop these interesting processes when they evaluate third-party vendors. So the first one they decided on is no black box partners and no probabilistic data. What this is about is understanding the methodology behind how their partners are gathering data that they're then purchasing. They've also decided to insist on high match rates with their partners, and also to establish measurement practices from the very beginning so that they could then evaluate the impact of that purchase data. As you can imagine, this is critical if you're dealing with large budgets and you want to maximize your return on investment. Samsung also shared some of their second-party data approaches. So their first one is identifying a business reason and joint KPIs to enter into a partnership. And so this is important because there's probably a lot of different organizations out there that would love to partner with Samsung. And then this works as a filter so that they can prioritize different partnerships. Also start with the use case in mind and grow from there. So focus on getting some small incremental wins before you go after the big picture. And then the third one is one that I borrowed in those 6 steps to get started, making data part of the conversation with their broader partnership teams. Just introducing that can help connect you with the right people on your partners' organizations that could unlock new opportunities. So key takeaways. The first is second and third-party data partnerships will help complete your first-party data that you have available so that you can get a complete view of your customers. And Audience Manager's Audience Marketplace feature helps facilitate these transactions and make it easy. And then we also talked about the 6 steps to get started, beginning with the use case, thinking through metrics and KPIs, considering the gaps that you're trying to fill in your first-party data, also thinking about what you can offer to partners that might be valuable to them, building on existing partnerships, and iterate, testing, and learning. And ultimately, the goal here is to try to get closer to knowing your customer across all their touch points so you can do a better job delivering great experiences. And just one other thing I'd like to add here is being a better shopkeeper is about, that B2C aspect of talking to your customers. But it's also about having good engagements and experiences with your partners too. So as you think about third-party and second-party data partnerships, it may be easiest to think about things programmatically and purely transactional. But it's a key insight based on the experiences of customers like Samsung that being able to negotiate and have real conversations with your partners to find use cases and ways to add value to both of your organizations is critical to success. So now that we've talked about how we think about this from a product standpoint, I'd like to invite Ian and the team up to begin the panel portion of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt. How's everyone doing? Last leg, exciting stuff, lots of data. So I'm actually personally really excited about this. I've been looking forward to this conversation. And it will be a conversation, so we've got some set questions and a bit of a structure for the conversation, but we're absolutely more than happy to have an actual conversation because I feel actually really privileged to be on stage with the panel members, having worked with the individuals and or extended teams of these guys, with these guys. I always walk away learning something, so I'm incredibly excited to have this conversation and learn more. And I've got my little notebook here, so I'll be taking notes. Hope you are too. There'll be a test at the end. But we'll get started. So first, actually like to hand over to the guys and introduce themselves. So Angelo, you want to take it?
Angelo SanibelDee, been with Nine Entertainment now, approaching 3 years as head of data products.
What does that mean?
Means many things, but I'll summarise it down to probably 3 things. First of all, we build insights products. We make those insights actionable by having audiences which you can actually buy as an advertiser across our digital media inventory. And 3, increasingly, we're starting to build out what I consider to be some world-class measurement products and attribution products.
Thank you.
Wow.
Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess Chan. I work at eBay Australia and New Zealand, and I look after audience automation.
And what does that mean?
So that means that I try to understand how to make an ID fluid across multiple marketing touchpoints and across our wide advertising suite.
Okay, great. Andrew.
Andrew Reid, General Manager for TG Analytics and TG Insights. I've been working in the business now for about 2.5 years. We set up the business in late 2015, and the purpose of the business was to really become a major player in the second-party data space in Australia, and we keep to grow over that period. We're now in our 3rd year.
Fantastic. And I've actually seen a lot of growth in what you guys are doing, so we're excited to kind of get into that for sure. And last but not least, David. And I'm gonna any hands up with who just saw David speak in the last session. Those okay, great.
And they still showed up here, which is great to see. So
absolute rock star. I couldn't get in. I was like, yeah, well, it was full.
I
so
sort of asked him to keep you out of the room.
That makes sense why everyone else could, but I couldn't. Yeah.
Okay. So my name's David Goods. I look after automated marketing capability at Suncorp, and the word capability is key there because what I quite often find in the industry when I talk to different companies is that people that are responsible for activating on capability, getting stuff done, getting campaigns out the door, are also expected to know how it works, whereas what I actually do is I don't kind of do anything. I just know how it all works under the hood so that I can enable others to get on with the doing.
And I'd be really interested, we'll revisit that a little earlier, because I think maybe some of you guys are the same, but I find it fascinating, not just people's roles, but how they evolve as the industry does as well. So we'll touch on that as well. Cool. So let's kick things off. Oh, actually, sorry, are you able to switch the markers around? Thanks, guys. But to kick it, I'll start with you, actually, David, again. So you're at Suncorp, multi-brand. You must have a lot of data on your customers. So why data? Like, why engage with other businesses to acquire or get more of a view of the customer?
Yeah, so I guess it's true, yeah. If in services, companies are going to have a high number of customers and multiple brands. But when you think about it, depending on the strategy of what you're looking to achieve, you may know a lot about your customers, but if you need to acquire and grow your business and get new customers, you don't have data on the customers you don't have. And so there's a blind spot there for us. And of course, privacy being very, very important, there are many scenarios where it's not right for us to use our customer data in those particular ways. So there's plenty of opportunity to plug those blind spots by partnering up with other companies out in the industry.
Interesting. So from a security perspective, it's a compliance conversation around what you can use your own data for as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think trust is very important for many companies, but more so, I would say, for insurance and banking. So it's important that we respect our customers and respect the trust that they instill in us and make sure we understand when we can and can't use different parts of our data.
That's really interesting. And Jess, same question to you, because eBay, I mean, the amount of stuff I buy, whether I should or shouldn't, like, you must have a lot of behavioural data. So why look for additional data?
Yeah, so eBay, we actually produce over 8 billion rows of data a day, so it's actually too much data. But beyond the e-commerce ecosystem, we actually don't know who you are, and we do want to acquire new customers. We are the top e-commerce site in Australia and the top 5th website in Australia, so it is hard to try and find partners that can actually provide incremental scale to our suite. But we do... we've just invested in real estate data, for example, to try and find a 360 view of who our customer is.
Just to add to it as well, I think there's another component is the frequency of touch points. Different industries, different websites are going to have more or less frequency of use, and so if you need to understand intent type data, then it might be very difficult for, say, an insurer or a bank that may not have frequency contact to build a profile around what people are, who people are online.
And this additional data, has this changed the way you can look at your marketing, your use cases? Is it pivoted in the way you action your marketing at all? I'd be interested to.
Yeah, so we wanted to identify who Australians were moving their houses so that they could sell their washing machine or sell their fridge, and we wouldn't have been able to do that unless we invested in real estate data. Like, we can infer from a delivery address, we can infer from certain aspects of where you live to where you deliver a product, but we really needed to invest in a second-party data set to get the accuracy.
Okay, cool, awesome. And Andrew, on to you then. So similar question, but from a data provider's point of view, what are the key areas or reasons you see brands and businesses wanting additional data for their customers, on their customers?
Look, I think sometimes the word marketplace can sort of push us down in a certain direction. I think marketplace has a valid part to play in a second-party discussion. But for our purposes, we're trying to broaden out that second-party discussion. We're talking about things around insights. We're talking about how does that common audience exist between our data set and someone else. How does that impact the personalization issues, design issues, the customer experience issues? Programmatic certainly plays a role, but we're obviously trying to temper that with a broader view of that common customer. You know, how do we help eBay, for example, better sell product by knowing a little bit more about their customers in an entertainment space? You know, if we're delving into discretionary spend in terms of that lifestyle aspect, how does that data point help a business like eBay? So we're trying to, I guess, stretch that relationship beyond programmatic into something more strategic in this market.
That's great, and I'm really glad you brought that up actually, because it's a really important point, and that whole, and back to Matt Skinner's point earlier, it's if you're engaging with data, start with the use case, but that use case is not just restricted to programmatic or paid media ad spend. So it's really great to see people like yourselves pushing that boundary and having those conversations. Because again, I wasn't being funny. Like every time I talk to these guys, I learn something new. And even when they come in to present to the Adobe team to give us an update on what they're doing, you know, our hair's blown backwards just to the level of insights and analytics and additional value that they bring to businesses go far beyond just we're a data provider. So that's a really interesting case, and we'll definitely keen to pick up that a bit more as well. And Angelo, anything to add to that?
Look, I suppose Nine plays a really interesting space because, again, we were talking about this earlier today. Nine isn't a data provider, but obviously being a digital business, we capture a lot of data on those audiences who come to our properties on a daily basis, whether that might be across our digital network, and I'll spruik Nine just for a second here, you know, Nine News or particularly Nine Now, which is our catch-up TV service. But again, we're obviously capturing very unique media consumption data points. At the same time too, we run authentication across Nine Now, which allows us to capture things like age, gender. Again, if you look at media audiences being bought, age and gender represents about 50% of audiences being bought in a digital environment. So two simple data points become highly valuable to a lot of end advertisers. So bringing it back to a point, we've sort of seen data sharing as an opportunity. We don't know everything there is to know about our audiences, so we have to actually buy data. So we sit, in effect, in the middle. So we are a data buyer, and we have data partnerships with companies like Qantas's Red Planet, Equifax, and also Data Republic. But at the same time too, we actually share data to some of Australia's largest advertisers and giving them and infilling particular data points that they don't actually currently know on their audiences. So again, we're sort of in the middle there. We're a media business at the end of the day, but we use data to have strategic conversations and use that to solve sort of marketing challenges for those advertisers who spend considerable amounts of dollars across both our linear TV business and our digital properties.
Yeah, and there was two key points you touched on there, which I found quite interesting. And I think I observed the thing, if you move from like a third party to a second party, the relationships change as well. And I think through conversations we've had around that, you know, one data provider is not necessarily the be-all and end-all of data. It's about the wider ecosystem. And going back to that, and we'll definitely discuss this further, like the key use case. You've got a key use case, that's your focal point, not necessarily just the data. The data is there to fuel that. So whether the data is from source A and B, and this ecosystem kind of cultivates. And so Matt and I have this conversation. So the US are very aware that in the second party data space, it's really this region which really driving the field, and definitely keeping us on our toes in terms of a technology platform is what new features, what new capabilities, what can we do better. So I think that's a really key point. A second key point, that data fidelity. I think you guys both alluded to it, and in fact, I think you've got a slide or two on this. If you want to talk us through these, actually.
Again, this is a slide which, when I first joined Nine about 3 years ago, I was asked to do a review of all the data points we had within the business. And again, when I actually draw what I want to know about a human being, I sort of start off with, actually the first thing I want to know is I want to know their PI. I want to know who they actually are. It's not good enough that I actually know that they're a cookie or a device. That's not beneficial to me moving forward if I ever want to, in effect, build an attribution style product. Because you know what, the last time I checked, I don't see cookies and devices walking into car dealerships buying cars. People do. So that's the first thing you've got to do. So we were quite lucky at Nine. Around the time period I started, they had actually launched a login, and it's, you've got to basically log in to Nine now to actually access the content. That's not something that's voluntary. Many of our competitors have actually chosen for it to be voluntary. We made it forced. So that was really key. We know who they are. At the same time too, we were able to pick up demographics, socio-economic aspects, which we were getting from a third party. Attitudes, again, is another important sort of area to look at. Triggers, it's interesting you're talking about real estate data, because in effect, what you're trying to do is pick up movers. Whether we like it or not, movers has been, and it has been for probably close to 2 to 3 decades, a major spend opportunity. So again, if you're an advertiser who is dealing in sort of furniture, targeting movers is really quite important. Looking at transaction history, this is really key. What are the products that they're buying? Whether we like it or not, what you bought in the last 3 months is going to be a predictor for what you're going to buy in the next 3 months. Purchase intent. If I'm on a renovation site, I'm more than likely going to be particularly walking into a Bunnings or a Mitre 10 store to basically kick off a renovation. And then media consumption. We were quite lucky at Nine that when we launched our Nine Now catch-up TV service, we were able to actually start to look at media consumption at a TV show level. So, and I use the example of Ian, who, and Ian was quite responsible for the implementation of our DMP at Nine. Ian would sort of call me and, we'd discuss what he did on the weekend, and he would tell me that he doesn't watch TV, but his TV show watch history would suggest that he was watching 5 hours, binge watching Married at First Sight on a Saturday night.
That's actually illegal.
But if you look 3 years ago, we in effect saw this. So we were really demographic heavy, socioeconomic heavy. We had to move to a world of this, and we had to do that with, in effect, third parties, people like Equifax, people like Red Planet and Data Republic. So that's probably one of the key things. But the choice of our data partnerships, and again, it alludes to Matt's sort of previous presentation, which is, again, the partners we looked for had to have PI, so their data asset had to be built on PI, which meant they had population files. So if you were coming to me with an unauthenticated database that was built on cookies and site visitation, that wasn't good enough. That's not where Nine needed to be. We're all about identity. We know who our customers are. We know data points, they're reputable data points, and we could easily explain that. So our data strategy at Nine is to collect as much PI, share it in a hashed manner to data partners, and bring in those data points and allow those audiences to be built, to be bought across our digital properties.
And can you quickly explain for those who are not aware, the hashed, what that means exactly?
Well, in effect, again, different organisations have different policies on how they actually share their data to third parties. At Nine, we adopt a strategy which is we want to protect the data that we collect on our users, and it's all around reputational damage. If we were to have a data breach with one of our data partners, we know that the clear text PI, nobody would ever be able to recognise who those people were. So in effect, what we're doing at Nine is taking a very strategic position to, really look after the details and the PI data that they actually share with our customers. So that's a real, in effect, all built around the reputation of Nine and making sure that nothing happens in the data space that could potentially damage the brand of Nine. If you look at Nine as a media business, I mean, we've been around for 60 years. I mean, I grew up watching, Humphrey v. Bear, and that was a long time ago. We're going to be around for another 60 years. So from that perspective, we will not do anything with data that will jeopardise who we are as an entertainment business.
It's actually great to hear about the level of discipline that's being introduced around identification, because it's been a while, but since I've looked at the DMP as a feature called the Visitor Profile Viewer. Some of you might be familiar with it, and I've got to tell you, when I've first logged into that, when we started to dabble around with looking at segments and overlap and understanding from some of the data sources we could draw upon that were not our own, I learned a lot about myself. I was male and female. I had no children. I had 5 children. I had, I don't know why I go to work every day, because I had an income of, I don't know, 7 figures, but I also had an income of 10K. So it just talks to the maturity that's happening over time. And I think through that discipline of making sure that there's quality behind that data, that it's identified and it's not aggregated.
That's really important point. And actually one point I want to come back to. You mentioned, so you made a business decision to put authentication on that, because talking with other customers, it seems that's a bit of an internal conflict. Like, do we put it up for our data strategy, but we may lose some people authenticating or actually adopting these? So some publishers are facing that. Do you guys, was that a long process? Do you know? What sort of conversation?
That all happened before my time. So no, I was quite lucky. And I come from an offline background. So again, I've worked with in effect, large offline databases. It was one of the attractions of coming to Nine, which was, we were going to collect data. I think people thought that we would max out at about 3 million sign-ups to Nine now. It's at about 6.5 million. If you actually look at that, that's in effect done within 3 years or under 3 years. And that provides a really powerful data asset. So that the whole concept of authentication was around building a first-party, data asset. And if you look at what those capabilities allow you to do, and recently, about a week ago, we launched addressable TV. So what we're able to do is actually target a individual, say age or gender, across web, app and CTV. So we've created in effect a Nine user ID based on a human being, and we can actually start to target you as an individual across a whole bunch of devices, and you can actually frequency cap off the back of that.
So it's a really so it's a really strategic, important move that was made for the authentication. And actually, so I just wanted to quick check of the room. Is anyone else in the room having that, facing that conversation of, do we put an authentication wall on our properties, or come across that conversation at all? Show of hands. Yeah, okay, so a bit of a mix. Okay, cool.
I mean, the other key thing is we obviously operate in an environment whereby our competitors are no longer the Australian publishers. They are people like Google and Facebook. And when you look at authentication across a property like Nine now, it allows you to then very quickly develop a Facebook custom audience style competitor product in market. So we are not far, we're not talking 3-4 years away. We are talking months away from having what I refer to as a custom audience style product, where we can target you as a group of people in the living room. So think about that from a credit card.
So beware, is that what you're saying? Beware.
Well, it's not so much a beware, it's in effect saying if you are a credit card intender, you will receive a credit card offer from a major bank or a challenger brand on a connected TV in your living room. Let's think about advertising. Advertising, if it's relevant and you provide advertising at the right time with the right product and there's intent, that's actually a really good experience. And if we're going to be all about experiences, isn't serving the right ads to the right people really key?
And so, Andrew, you look like you wanted to jump in at one point. Did you have a note there?
Well, look, I think authentication is fine, and I think it's half the battle. Ultimately, we want to have that PII discussion, and whether you want to call it a federated ID or a universal ID, that's okay. The key here is quality, veracity of the data itself. I mean, you're going to set up a login, but what is the veracity of the data sitting behind the login? So for me, my bugbear is, not just scale and not just about logins, but how do we authenticate the accuracy of the data in the first place? And I think the next challenge is for an industry and for publishers and data providers is actually to implement some sort of standard around data. And I'd be the first to put my hand up and say, how do we verify gender and age, for example? If there's so much misinformation out there, let's test it. I would love to see a level of standard across all data providers, particularly second-party data providers, because that'll shake the market out pretty quickly. So as a provider of second-party data that's authenticated, and we've gone through those hoops in terms of the validation of the data, I want to see more providers go through those same hoops.
Yeah, so I was going to say, because actually I understand your business, you guys put a tremendous amount of effort and work into that kind of accuracy and stuff. Are you able to talk through that kind of process a little, just unpack that a little, whatever you can share around that quality part?
Well, effectively it's the core of the business. We have to really fulfill a product at the end of the day. So the elements that sit behind a particular PII account, range from age, gender, email, mobile, first name, last name, etc. On that, we build up all their other transaction data points on that particular account detail. So effectively, our data set is very deep. It's quite narrow. We're dealing with sport, arts, entertainment in the Australian marketplace. Market reach is there, but we aren't real estate, we aren't travel, we aren't finance. But what we do know about 80% of Australians is in that space. And because we have to fulfill that ticket at the end of the day, and for those of you who don't know, Ticket Tech is part of that TG group, that's where that authentication process comes in and the validity of that data stands out. And we put our data through a number of trading desks in the market to test the accuracy of that data. Now the TG data comes in at 80+% in terms of accuracy. A certain search engine comes in at 65%, and then a certain telco comes in at 55%. So what's coming down the track in the next 6 or 12 months will be a discussion about the accuracy of second-party data.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I know, unfortunately, today we couldn't have any case studies show, but I think the guys have got definitely tap the guys on the shoulder because there was some really great use cases they can talk to from what I've just said. So definitely would say get involved with that. Moving over to so Jess, moving over to the key differences between because what we've not really talked much on is the third-party data providers. What would you say are key differentiators in working with second-party versus third-party in that regard?
So the third-party data providers that I've seen have huge scale. They boast 90 billion device IDs or whatever, however many device IDs they boast, but there's no accuracy. They are black box. There's no transparency. You don't know how they've built their audiences. And as David mentioned, you can actually be bucketed into a male and female segment. I recently did a test on my user ID when I mapped to a certain third-party provider, and I was an auto enthusiast. I don't have a car. I was also a home and garden lover, and I live in an apartment. So it was just really interesting to see the accuracy of third-party data, even though they boast scale. Oh, now you can see my hands shaking. Yeah. Even though they boast scale, they don't actually have accuracy. And with second-party data providers, even though the real estate data that we invested in was really accurate, there was no scale. So that's the experience that we've had so far.
Okay, and David, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's also something to be said about understanding where that data is coming from. It's a bit of a parallel example, not a specific one, but I did catch a headline a couple of days ago that sort of stuck out in my mind, and it had to do with a marketing campaign that was run out of the military where they were looking to leverage two gamers to help and influence the strategy around why you would want to get into the military. And then it turned out after they put that out into market that those two particular gamers were a bit infamous for negative commentary online, maybe a bit of trolling, etc., etc. So it completely undermined that entire campaign. And so I think whilst there might be that sort of unknown elephant in the room around third-party data, as we get smarter about tracing that back where it comes from, who knows what types of things might come to light around where you've inadvertently bought your data from that you're going to be protected from a little bit more, I think, if you have a second-party data relationship.
And have you seen things change with the third-party data providers in terms of transparency, methodology? So as we mentioned, a lot of the third-party data providers we have on the Adobe site and stuff, being very open with the, especially with the GDPR changes as well, just ensuring that customers, the process, has the conversations changed at all locally?
I think there's a possibility of is it once bitten, twice shy, or twice bitten, thrice, I don't know. But I think there's a chance that when it comes to exploring third-party and second-party data, if you've not had success, you might tend to gravitate towards second and not go back. So I think from my experience, from what I've seen and how I've heard people talk about it, that might be the scenario that's come to play. And so because of that, not going back to see what third-party data has to offer after not being successful means that we haven't had a chance to see how it's grown.
Yeah, right. So moving on from that, I wanted to talk about commercializing data and what that means. So Andrew, I'd love to start with you. What does commercialization look like? So as a business, whether that's operational, technical, can you give us a bit of a walk through that?
Look, for us, as I mentioned earlier, it was a journey of really building a business from scratch. You know, how do you take a rough diamond like a data warehouse and make a commercial decision to externalize that, to find partners, to run a P&L across essentially a core, straight data business. We made a decision very early on was what differentiated our data. How do you first of all clean the data? How do you take 28 million uniques and bring them down to 14 million and know that you've actually got those uniques sitting in there? And then secondly, what stands you out from the crowd? We gravitated very quickly to the fact that our data was cultural in its aspect. The fact that people spend money going to a sport or arts or entertainment event told us a lot about that person. So there's a psychological or a psychometric attachment to this particular data set, as well as the transactional pieces. So commercially for us, it was really taking a bet that we would build direct partnerships rather than sort of throw everything into an exchange or a marketplace and just saturate the market. That was never our intention. The intention was to build direct partnerships, either with media organisations or with brands directly, and we've sort of stuck to that by and large for that period.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I love the way you say that the data kind of, how did you say it? I don't want to get your words wrong. I had it more of a cultural kind of background to it. What was the term you used?
There's a cultural insight to the data. It's not financial data, it's not grocery data. It's actually an experiential piece of someone's life that goes into this data set.
Because we use this term behavioural data, but it's kind of lost its zing, if you know what I mean. So that just really woke it up for me. It's like the culture of a people or a person or a family, etc. And with kind of that approach or that view of the data, did that in turn influence which brands or partners you started to work with or began to work? Did that influence the strategy of the go-to-market?
Yeah, I mean, in this area of commercialization, you've got to make some hard decisions quickly. You have to have runs on the board fairly quickly after you start the business, and that's just a reality. So we gravitated very quickly to the media sector because the media sector is very sophisticated by and large with data. It understands the issues around segmentation. It can sell data very well. So our business model was go to market, find a media partnership, and start building on that. And that's what we did in the early days. But in terms of the brand relationships, we've got to be careful because there are certain aspects. We don't provide real estate data, so eBay are after that. So we've got limited utility for eBay in that regard. But we may be working with a brewery group or an auto group who spend $40 million in sponsorship across AFL. All of a sudden now the business case for us is how do we intersect with that experience, that sponsorship world, and then bring our data into that. And that's how we've operated.
Yeah, okay. And Angelo, similar question, because I know you guys actually have different kind of business models, and would that change the way that you guys came to market as a data team?
Again, when we look at sort of the implementation of Audience Manager, and we're relatively young, when you think about, say, we turned it on in November 2016, and you were present for that. We've only been using this platform for about 2 years, but what's happened in that 2 years is that data has become part of our conversation with advertisers, and that's been really key. So you can't actually buy data from Nine. So you can't ring me up and say, I want to buy your data. That doesn't happen. What we do is we have a media spend conversation, which is if you're a major advertiser or want to be a major advertiser with Nine, we will introduce data as part of that sort of negotiation. So we've seen a really good example with a major telco where they, in effect, quadrupled their media spend across our digital assets. And whilst our data is actually quite diverse and it's picking up a lot of consumption around our sites, one of the marketing challenges, and this is really key, our data is used to, in effect, solve marketing challenges. When you look at the assets we have, you may holistically look at them and say, well, they can't really help me. For a major telco, we were able to segment 20% of our audience and look at those people who are consuming Nine now on their mobile phone because they wanted to target high data users. And we discovered that somebody who's consuming multiple hours per month on a device or a mobile phone, that's somebody a telco wants to actually target.
And that's, I think that's a really, really good point in that, going back to that use case piece, like you'll be surprised, and I'm always surprised, and why I always learn so much from you guys is having that conversation. The data unpacks use cases sometimes. Have an approach, have a vision, obviously, but in the telco example, it's something they would never have thought of partnering with yourselves. So, and that kind of go, and I was speaking before, you used this term that I really love, this consultative sell. Mm-hmm. So we're talking rate card versus conversation, and I'd love to, Jess and David yourself kind of, I think we'll touch on this in a moment hopefully, but that whole buy data for a use case, not just data for data's sake, that side of things. So can you talk us through a bit about that consultative sell and that those custom audiences that you might pull together as opposed to...
So again, I mean, if I use the telco example, they're one whereby they had a whole series of marketing challenges. They were a challenger brand. They obviously needed to grow. In effect, they came to us with a whole series. One particular question they had was they actually wanted to know their competitors or users who were with their competitors. And again, we have a data lake at Nine, so whilst we onboarded the DMP, we also spent close to a year building up a data lake. So in effect, all of our sort of data, whether it's offline data or login data or competition data or digital data, even ad server log data, all feeds into a data lake. We were able to mine that and actually work out, just from IP address, who your telephony provider was. And from there, we're able to actually segment and pass those audiences out, and that was really key. The telco didn't look to us as being able to have that capability. We've probably got the smartest guys, and it's certainly not me. I work with probably some of the smartest guys who can actually mine digital data and actually fuse that with actually offline data.
Some of these in the room? Some of the teams in the room?
No, they're back in the office there working.
Burn.
But again, that's really key. So, we've got a sales team who really understands data, can talk second-party data. We also have a whole bunch of guys in the data products team, some of them who are here, who are really good at articulating and actually uncovering those business problems, and then can communicate with those, in effect, data scientists.
And does that kind of influence the kind of use case, or at least unpack opportunities for the sales team?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really the goal is to uncover what those particular needs are. And again, that's not a 5-minute conversation. At Nine, we want to understand your business. Different businesses have different challenges. Are you looking to acquire customers, or are you looking to defend your market position? Again, we want to understand that. We'll translate that into audiences.
And moving off to Dave, I'll start with you actually. Has this changed, so the way the guys are commercializing the data, has this changed the way you engage with data providers? So moving from a standard rate card to a, let's have a conversation.
Yeah, I think it's certainly evolved the thinking around what might be possible. So where we initially thought, okay, well, let's look at a list of data providers, see the overlap of segments, see what the potential sizes are, make our own inference about what a segment might mean, and then go ahead and use that in a use case, find that it doesn't work, start to draw conclusions about perhaps the role of third-party or second-party data, isn't all it's cracked up to be. But that missing part of all of that was, or the challenge with what I've just described, are the assumptions along the way about how to best put that data to use. And so being able to have a conversation with people that provide the data to talk about, well, this is what I think that segment means, and this is what I think, or how we might, the type of creative we might put behind it, and to have a conversation around perhaps where they've seen it work successfully in other examples. Put that learning to use might mean the difference between successful use of data and a not so successful outcome.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to skip ahead now, just looking at time. Readiness. So what does readiness look like? So I'm keen to understand, and David, I'll start with you and pass to yourself, Jess. Engaging in data. So what's step one? Is it compliance? Yeah. Is it which data? Is it use case?
I think it's absolutely. I think engage legal before you actually think you need to, and the way in which you can approach the conversation with legal, I think. They get a bit of an unfair rap. They're quite often seen as the ones that put up the brick walls. But if we look at what's happening out there, I think it's their time to shine now, because they're your guardians, they're your protectors. So if you approach legal and say, oh, well, we want to do all of this, and say, how can we do this and remain protected and make sure we respect consumer law and our privacy, and what does that look like? I think it's a much more healthy conversation to have. And making sure that you know exactly where the data's coming from, how it's being collected, helps support that conversation as well.
Okay, cool. Jess, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just when you invest in data, you sometimes invest in like 10 different segments, and a lot of the times the campaign managers don't have the scope of work or don't have the operations ready to actually invest in different creative sets and different A/B measure testing. So, make sure that the campaign managers have operationalized the additional creative it's going to take, the additional time it's going to test, because a lot of the times the marketing team is very reactive and they don't have time to onboard a new investment, let alone making sure that you've invested in a specific product for auto enthusiasts, a specific product for real estate movers. That's what we learned the hard way.
Yeah, all right. And just get a check of the audience. Downstream, does everyone run into these issues of, okay, we got this great data, now we need to operationalize creative, etc. Show of hands for pain points? Everyone's doing it perfectly. Okay. Preaching to the choir. Okay, cool. So moving along, people process readiness. Andrew, you've got a slide for us to talk through.
Yeah, very briefly, I think when we talk about, engagement with businesses, we're making a judgment on maturity, effectively, because the way we engage with businesses typically starts at a CRM level, where they have a data asset in place and the quality of that data. So there are several phases, and very briefly, the first phase is around knowledge management, and that's a combination of things. That is, having that first party in place. It's about having that universal view of a customer. Once that's in place and once they're ready to have that discussion, then the second party comes into it. We call this the intensive customer intelligence phase, where they're now ready to actually see that overlap between the two data sets, understand what that common universe looks like, see the attributes across their systems as well as our systems, and start to build out that universal view. Ultimately, you start to get into this collaboration space where multiple second-party data sets come into this environment, and hypothetically, you could have financial data sitting alongside our data versus real estate data. It's really important, and this goes back to the initial conversation that was raised at the beginning. It's building out that affinity or that detail around a customer by bringing in various second-party assets into the space. The final phase is, touches on that cultural piece that I talked about earlier. And, ultimately there's a goal measure here for any business where they can start to build a 360 view of a customer, not just based on their own first party, but by bringing in those other second party data sets as well. I refer to it here as that idiocultural expertise. And it's just a nice fancy term for saying the ability for that business to understand a customer, not just in terms of transactional terms, but in cultural terms, in value terms, in terms of what's important to them in their lifestyle. If a business can get their head around that, if a business can digitize that information and codify their CRM systems without those additional attributes, then you finally get to that final phase. So if you can see through these 4 phases, it's a maturity cycle. And for what it's worth, very few businesses that we deal with are ready for that third and fourth phase. We're very much stuck. I wouldn't say stuck, but I'd say we're in that second phase of really bringing that second-party data into that first-party environment. Ultimately, you actually have other conversations in market with other second-party providers as well.
Yeah, great. And you made a really important point, I think, in that the way you engage is very much dependent on the maturity of the customer. So the way you operate, which I think is fantastic and really important to note. I always like to make this, not analogy, but like from the advertising side of things, when programmatic came into play, there was this big thing of, right, humans are out, machines do everything, when in fact there was more conversations, just the machine did all the processing. To me, I see a similar sort of approach in that, you know, this second-party ecosystems, it's not just a whole process of press a button and collect data and execute data. It's having that conversation. So phase 3 and 4 are essentially coming to life because of those conversations and really getting a fine-tuning understanding of the use case, the outcome, the measurements, the uplifts as well.
It'll happen, but again, it goes back to this issue of quality and veracity, and
absolutely,
you know, that phase 3 and phase 4 will involve media as well. You know, it'll involve media organizations, advertising, first-party brands, and that's ultimately where, as Angelo mentioned, we'll start moving into that phase very, very shortly.
Yeah, and some key points you made earlier as well, those use cases. You know, it's not just use case one, it's like so many different across the business, so for the wider teams. And things like, you know, the audience manager bringing together different teams because the whole business understands that actually we've all got the same outcome that we're trying to achieve. It's about working together now we have the data to do so. Okay, fantastic. Okay, cool. So moving along, Jess, actually, I want to now move to you. So you're an Adobe customer, obviously. So you're leveraging DMP. I hear good things. Thumbs up. Great. But we are more than aware. Before you let my ego run away with me, we're more than aware that, like yourselves, like many of you as well, there's a bigger ecosystem, a technical ecosystem out there. So Jess, you've actually got a slide to run us through, right? Just to run through.
Yes.
Are you able to share the clicker with?
Oh, thank you. Okay, 2 hands shaking.
The architecture, which I found really interesting.
Okay, so I look after audience automation, and it was a good segue because it's understanding your first-party data set before you even think about onboarding second or third-party data sets, to understand where the incremental value will lie for your business. And for me, it was, for my first 3 months at eBay, I was like, okay, what does our data look like? How many IDs are we recording? And what I found was there was multiple IDs related to the same customer. We've got a user ID with a past transaction in our data warehouse. We've got a CGUID ID for session behaviors. Then we've got device IDs with our DMP investment. And then we've also got email IDs for user logged in details. So all of those different IDs actually communicate a different story with each channel. So what that meant was when we're trying to personalize and we're trying to understand a customer's journey through all of our different marketing touch points, it was really hard to unify. So this is what audience automation looks like for me at the moment. It's understanding how we can tie all these different IDs into one ID. And what eBay has done is we've got a great engineer team in San Jose and Bellevue, and I wouldn't be able to do my job without them. They've basically created a grey box solution where, you know, it sits on an open source non-SQL environment, and they've built a client on top of that, which means that one ID can now be translated across the board, across all those green boxes that you see there. We also have a larger ecosystem where we're a publisher network as well. And the beauty of a publisher network is that a device ID equals a device ID, which is fantastic. But that doesn't mean that there isn't data leakages and match rate issues. And I know that we're running out of time, so...
No, we're good for time.
We're good? Oh, okay.
That was to keep Angelo on track.
Like they're far more eloquent than myself. But yeah, so what I found was the advertising part is the easy part because the ID can actually translate through our ecosystem really fluidly, whereas the marketing channels is a bit clunky. And there's dotted lines in the pipeline because eBay puts their customer first and foremost. And
we don't actually think that it's safe enough yet for our data to leave the fence just yet. The encryption's not strong enough. If a startup can come up with a solution where you can scramble an ID in real time once it's been matched, then fantastic. But otherwise, until that's policed or until there are better systems in place where it's automated and we can see in real time where our data is and how it's being used, these boxes, these dotted line boxes, will remain in the dotted line sections. And we've been working with partners. We've been working with Adobe marketplaces. We've been working with competitor marketplaces to see how we can push the envelope, but there actually hasn't been technology that can fix this solution. So if anyone wants to create that for us, you'll be quite rich. Yeah.
Did you see my presentation yesterday?
No, I didn't actually.
No, awesome. That's and thanks for sharing that. That was really interesting to see when you sent that across. Thank you.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay, so just wanted to stop for a moment and recap. So we've actually talked through a bit about why. So why data, the what, not just the what type of data, but what it means to be commercially ready, etc. And a bit about the how. So I actually wanted to kind of wrap up maybe around the value. So I'm just, yeah, so so Angela, maybe start with you. What does success look like? So how do you ensure success for your customers? And then, and Andrew, I'd love to get a similar answer from yourself.
I mean, the way we measure what we do, certainly from a data products team, is actually looking at how much does our data actually underpin media spend within our business. If you look at Facebook, Facebook makes $300 million in the AU market. In effect, what they're doing is they're not selling advertising, they're actually selling audiences. You know, you can buy audiences in effect. Our goal is to make data underpin as much media spend across our digital properties as high as possible. I mean, that's the goal. I'd love to be 100%. That's quite unrealistic in a short period of time, but you know, ultimately, we're one day going to get to a world where 100% of our media is actually being traded by our audiences.
And Andrew, success for the customer, what does that look like in your eyes?
Success for me is going from that deterministic view of a customer, being descriptive about who that person is when you match first and second party data, to a point where you're becoming more prescriptive or you're being more predictive around the likelihood of future events. You know, the ability to be more accurate around the data science, combined with programmatic, combined with marketing. That's where we want to get to. You know, the ability to incorporate various data sets, be more accurate in what we're doing for the future. For me, that's the definition of success in our space.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. And same question let's start with David. So what does success look like? And I know we've got a few slides for yourself as well to run through some learnings, but if you'd like to open up with... Ultimately,
I think it's like what Angela was saying. If we're able to match the right content to the right audiences, if we're able to make sure that if we are speaking to you, we're contextually relevant. You know, just because you've done a quote online for an insurance product doesn't necessarily mean you want to be followed around with ads for the next 3 or 4 weeks. There may be more to that story that we could learn from the better use of data to understand when's the right time to engage. And I think it's also about generating a better customer experience overall. So if we understand your needs more, we might know when's the right time to talk to you about different offerings we may have that will match those needs.
Okay, cool. And we'll just click through the slide. Is there a clicker?
Yeah, so a few key learnings. To be honest, a lot of this is very grassroots, it's very basics, but I think that's where the beauty is. Active participation in the tools. We were using the DMP for quite a long time, and yet there's still more that we had to learn about what it had to offer. You know, it was touched on before about the data export controls. There's a lot in there that actually can provide a lot of assurance, not only to your legal teams, but to data providers around how we not only won't intend to use the data, but how we prevent ourselves from inadvertently using it in a way that's not contractually agreed upon. And that's only through really getting into the nitty-gritty on how your tools work and using it yourselves. Absolutely, you'll see this all the time. Test and learn. Be safe to fail. And you would have no doubt gone through this type of journey when you did A/B testing on your website. So I think to a certain extent in the use of data, the same rule applies. If you're not successful the first time, it doesn't necessarily mean the whole premise of building out richer data sets goes out the window. It's just about fine-tuning that and refining and understanding how it best can be made to work. I touched on it before, so I won't say it again. And realistic expectations. You know, data, it may not be a complete silver bullet for your marketing strategies. It may not completely upturn everything and turn it around. But if you can turn that into a positive return on investment and have it complement what you do, then I think there's a lot of success in that alone.
No, great. And okay, so we'll probably wrap it up around there because we've got a bit of spare time for some questions. So if anyone has some questions, have a little think. But I think for me, just taking some notes through there as well, three key takeaways, I think, themes from Matt and yourselves. It's not just buy and sell. What I found really fascinating when I was getting more into this myself and working with the guys on the stage here is it's not just about here's some data, buy, sell, etc. So all these new use cases, the data insights, I mean, like a lot of what you guys do just blows my mind. Use case, not just data for the sake of it. So go in with a use case, start small, aim for value and grow from there. I think we all agree. And lastly, know what success looks like. So again, sounds like basic stuff, but having those simple benchmarks, measurements, so you can go back to the business very quickly and say, we've got that uplift. We've proved the value of investing in this data. But yeah, I think those were my key takeaways, I think. We'll probably wrap there, but we will take questions. Does anyone have questions? Hands up. But first, because I'm sure all of you do, you're just trying to think of the right words. Please give a round of applause again. Again, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank you. Welcome.